Hi, my name is Drew Johnson, and for my paper I chose to research power control theory by doing an annotated bibliography. This was found in chapter 13 of our textbooks in the feminist chapter. So I have a question I want you to all think about throughout this presentation. Did you grow up in a family where your father worked and had power in the workplace and your mother did not? Or did you grow up in a family where both parents had power in the workplace, both parents did not have power in the workplace, or in a single mother family? This will be something to think about in my next section, and it is something that can be discussed if you choose to comment on my presentation. I have previously done research on the basics of feminism and feminist therapy and psychology, so I was interested in learning about how something related to feminism related to criminology. In this presentation, I will give a brief overview of power control theory, and then I will talk about the 6 sources I collected and how they relate to each other. To quote from the book Criminological Theories written by Akers and Sellers, the theory was set out explicitly to account for gender differences in delinquent involvement and how those gender differences expand or contract depending on the type of family structure and the degree of parental controls over boys relative to girls. End quote. The type of family structure is either patriarchal or egalitarian. In patriarchal families, the father's job puts him in a command position. He is the one telling others what to do. In these families, the mother is a stay-at-home mom, or she works a job where she is not in charge but has to take orders. In contrast, there is the egalitarian family. There are a few different types of families in the egalitarian structure. There is a mother and father who both work in command positions. There is a mother and father who both take orders at work, or there is a single mother household. In both types, mothers will more than likely apply supervision and emotional bonds over both sons and daughters. However, in patriarchal families where the man is a breadwinner and is in command position, the mother will apply greater control over the daughter than the son. This theory says that sons are given greater freedom because they are not controlled by their mother in a supervision or relational control way, so they are more likely than daughters to engage in risky actions and not be afraid of the consequences of those actions. These gender differences are believed to be different in egalitarian families because of the greater control the mother has over both the son and the daughter. So now that I have given you a brief overview of power control theory, I will now talk about my articles and how they relate to each other. The first article I looked at was entitled Explain the Gender Gap in Juvenile Shoplifting, a Power Control Theoretical Analysis by Brenda Sims Blackwell, Helmut Heinlanger, and Heinz Leitgeb. It was a study about the gender gap in juvenile shoplifting and how it pertains to power control theory. It wanted to explain this by finding out if juveniles in Austria came from egalitarian or patriarchal households. This study, as well as the others, gave a more in-depth overview of power control theory than I previously explained. The study was a questionnaire of 2,911 use, and it did find that in patriarchal families, boys are found to shoplift more than either sex from either a patriarchal or egalitarian family. Remember that I previously stated that power control theory assumes that boys are given more freedom in patriarchal families, so this does make sense. A problem with this study and virtually all of the studies I looked at was the jargon used was complicated and the results were difficult to read unless you're involved in conducting research. The second article I researched was titled The Gender Monitoring of Juvenile Delinquents, a Test of Power Control Theory using a Retrospective Cohort Study by Valerie Bryan and Karina Scholes. This was another study of use, and all these studies were related except for one because they all use adolescents in their research. This study looked at youth offenders in custody and how it pertained to power control theory. This study wanted to see if girls were charged with more status offenses than boys, and if black girls were charged with more status offenses than white boys and black girls. A majority of the study were black youths. This study's data was collected from court cases, and it came from 170 males and 78 females. The first hypothesis stated that girls would be charged with more status offenses than boys, but this was not supported by the data. The second hypothesis was similar, but as quoted by Bryan and Schultz, girls who are black will be charged with more status offenses than boys and girls who are white and boys who are black. End quote. This hypothesis was supported because the mean status offenses for black girls was 2.02 and 0.95 for black boys, and for white girls the mean status offense was 0.83 and 1.02 for white boys. One of the limitations of this study was the lack of female participants. There were only 78 females compared to 170 males. The next article I looked at was titled Class, Gender, and Arrest, an Intergenerational Analysis of Workplace Power and Control by Christopher Uggan. This paper was interesting because the study looked, quote, whether parental and adolescent workplace freedom and control affect criminal behavior, end quote. This was according to Uggan. So this paper dealt with youth who worked, which is different than all the others. However, this paper, like the previous ones, adds to power control theory in dealing with adolescents. The participants were 1,000 youth who answered questionnaires, and 925 mothers and 650 fathers did as well. The main hypothesis stated that the total overall level of workplace freedom and control will be positively linked with law breaking amongst boys. This hypothesis was supported because 43% of male arrests came from the employer class, compared to only 9% of females. The main issue with this paper was that participants were asked to self-report crime that could have happened up to 2 years ago. Details over time can become hard to remember and can affect the results. The next article is titled Risk Preferences and Patriarchy, Extending Power Control Theory, and it was by Bruce Arkinacleave, Brenda Blackwell, Harold Grasmick, and John Hagen. This paper differs from the others because it looks at adults rather than adolescents. It looks at how adults fit into the power control theory. There were 416 participants and 54% were female. The first hypothesis dealt with illegal behavior being contingent on how much patriarchy was in their family when they grew up, and the second said that males would be more riskier than females raised in patriarchal families. Both were supported for males, but only weakly. The results were 8.836 for males who grew up in patriarchal families and 8.476 in the less patriarchal families. An issue with this paper was that it was biased. 81% of the participants were white, and we were not given information about the other 19%. The next article is titled Family Structure, Power Control, and Deviance, Extending Power Control Theory to Include Alternate Family Structures, and it was by Christopher Bader, Kristen Bates, and Carson Mencken. Power control theory typically only looks at a couple of types of families, single mother families and two-parent families. This study looked at alternative families such as single father families and step families. The study was from 534 college students. One of the main hypotheses said that, quote, family structure should have an indirect effect through mechanisms of patriarchy, specifically patriarchal attitudes, end quote. This was a quote from the authors. The results of this hypothesis found the hypothesis to be somewhat true. Patriarchy and family structure were related, but interestingly enough, it was not supported partly all the way. Single father families were found to have a larger amount of patriarchy than biological families. Two issues with this paper are that it was not representative because it was a sample of only college students, and only 26% of the total sample was part of an alternative family. The last article I looked at was entitled Gender and Family Differences in Adolescents' Heavy Alcohol Use, the Power Control Theory Perspective, and it was by Katarzyna Okules-Kozaran. This study looked to see how gender and family differences dealt with youth who drank heavily. It was conducted in Poland from the sample of 3,141 youth, and one of the reasons it was conducted is because women there have been becoming more influential in the workplace. One of the main hypotheses said that girls in families where there is more maternal power are at a greater risk to abuse alcohol than girls in more patriarchal families. This hypothesis was confirmed. Girls from egalitarian families were 1.4 times more likely to get drunk than girls from patriarchal families. An issue with the study is that it dealt with a loophole. One of the questions these youth were asked was how often they had been drunk in the past 12 months from drinking beer, wine, or vodka. There are many other liquors to get drunk from than just vodka. I have briefly gone over how these articles are all related, but now that we have gone over these articles, I will talk a little bit more about that. These articles are all related because they deal with youth and their activity in crime. Also, in these studies, males have been more likely to commit crimes than girls. Another way all these articles are related is that they all use research by John Hagen, the founder of power control theory. In conclusion, power control theory allows researchers to look at patriarchal and egalitarian families and look at issues such as risk perceptions and deviant behavior in youth, which was the topic of all these papers except for the one about adults. It is thought that boys from patriarchal families are more risky than girls due to lack of supervision or relational control by their mothers, and this was supported by the studies I looked at. So back to my question. Which family did you come from, and did it have any effect on risky or deviant behavior you engaged in? Feel free to comment on my discussion post about the type of family you grew up in and if it played into your risk-taking, law-breaking, or deviant behavior as a child. Thank you.